The other day, back in July, my daughter recommended that her mother and I watch a movie called Hamnet. She blurted off something in a text about it being a film about William Shakespeare and his wife. Whatever she may have actually said, my impression was that it was some romantic movie about Shakespeare, maybe something akin to Shakespeare in Love, a Shakespeare movie that came out in the 90s when I was a young man. Anyway, I texted back, sure, and then I rolled my eyes. My daughter wanted me and my wife to watch some chick flick, some date movie. Okay, sure, as if I'm not busy enough. But anyway, I put it on the back burner. One of these nights we'll catch it on Netflix or Amazon, I figured. I knew nothing about the film, nothing about the actors. If you listened to my episode on Cormac McCarthy, then you know that I am completely behind the times with regard to culture. Since college in the 90s, I've read few books that dated past the life of Hemingway. As it turned out, Hamnet was just newly streaming on Netflix at the time. The wife and I finally sat down to watch it last week. Now, I didn't know anything about the film beyond that it had something to do with Shakespeare. I didn't know that this film had already won awards, and I didn't know anything about the actors. I didn't even know their names or recognize them besides Emily Watson, who played Shakespeare's mother. And I went into this movie with a lot of prejudice. I told someone about what this film had to overcome with me, about the work that it had to do. I grew up watching John Wayne films, is the way I described it, which is not to pretend that I'm some completely uncultured oaf who hasn't seen movies with refined taste. I mean, I've watched My Dinner with Andre, okay? I'm not some action movie guy. But all that said, I am also nearly allergic to any kind of pretentious film or art films that try and fail to be deep without having any real substance to them. I'm not going to run up to you and gush about the latest Lars von Trier production. I don't even know if he's making film anymore, but hopefully you know what I mean. But I did run up to people gushing about Hamnet. This film pierced my soul. It's like that passage in the gospel when the old man tells pregnant Mary, he says, your soul will be pierced. I felt that way when the film was over. Something terrible and painful had happened to me, but it was also something beautiful. Something beautiful and perhaps beyond my ability to describe. Something that carried so much meaning that I had to unpack it and maybe spend much of my life thinking about it. In fact, I woke up at 1 a.m. the following morning, went to my office, and started writing. By sunup, I had 5,000 words written down, and I hadn't finished. But to be clear, I am not going to present a film synopsis today. There are plenty of those on the web by now. In the emotional aftermath of the film, I felt moved to write something about the final scene for a few reasons. One, it's simply really well done. It's an amazing piece of writing, of direction, of acting. This final scene, though, is roughly 25 minutes in length, maybe 23 minutes to be exact, but somewhere in that range. In a 2 hour film, that means that the final scene is, well, somewhere around 20% of the whole thing. One scene is 20% of the screen time. Basically, the entire film before that is just a setup for this scene. And in that final scene, there's very little dialogue. I mean, there's a play in the background, Hamlet, but we've all seen that before, or likely you have if you're watching this movie. So that's not original. And it's not like that is the focus of the scene. No, it is Agnes who is the focus. And to a lesser extent, her husband, William Shakespeare, and their son, Hamnet. And they say almost nothing during this final portion of the film, except where Shakespeare says his lines in the play. And the performance of the actress, Jessie Buckley, here is so good that I can't describe it. I don't want to keep saying amazing or incredible. Those words don't do her work justice here. And I'm going to try and not gush here. I'm not going to say that she is the greatest actress ever. I don't know that. I know that she is a great actress who had the opportunity of an actor's lifetime in this scene and powerfully exploited that opportunity. Here, they must have told her, you get a 25-minute scene in which you say almost nothing, and you're going to start as angry, disappointed, grieving, frustrated, betrayed housewife, and you are going to end the scene as, well, we'll get to the end of the scene. Bear with me. The more that I think about it, I do Paul Mescal, who played Will Shakespeare, and all the other actors a disservice here because they are also incredible. But really, it is Agnes, portrayed by Jessie Buckley, who is the real star of the show. So, yes, the scene is well written and well performed. It's also incredibly dense. So much is happening in this scene, but most of it is happening inside the character of Agnes. And it was the job of Jessie Buckley to make us see the emotional journey of this character, not to explain it to us, but to show us. In writing courses, that is a big catchphrase: show, don't tell. Books and films that come out and tell you how people are thinking or feeling generally fail because we as humans are moved when we can see emotions and ideas. And Jessie Buckley, in the character of Agnes in this film, performs an emotional work in this last scene that is simply unparalleled. The last scene is really about watching her character, Agnes, do much more than simply go through the stages of grief. She achieves something by the very end of the scene, something almost otherworldly. Now, this final scene can be interpreted and understood in many different ways, and all of them possess some sort of accuracy. It's like when scholars interpret the Bible, the text can be understood on different levels, and all of them are valid viewpoints. There's the historical or literal level, which is just the synopsis of what happened in a particular piece of text. Moses and the Israelites flee Egypt. There are allegorical levels as well. So then, well, this same passage on a deeper level is really the story of the soul fleeing slavery. And then there are moral interpretations and so on. And all of these are accurate in their own way as interpretations. And just so, it's possible to see this film for someone maybe possessing a little less sophistication, and that word sophistication will come back to us later. But it's possible to see the film and think to yourself, okay, this is sort of a slow, boring love story. And that person is going to be correct in their own way because, yes, in that final scene, Will and Agnes learn to love each other again. It's also possible to see the film and think, okay, this is a movie about grief. And that is also accurate. Agnes and Will lose their young son. It's a parent's worst imaginable tragedy. Most parents are willing to trade their lives for their children's. It's one of the if one of those ridiculous hypothetical questions were put to me and suddenly made real, for instance, if your son or daughter were about to be shot, would you step in front of the bullet? The answer is an immediate yes. Wouldn't even hesitate. It's the kind of commitment and bond that has nothing to do with reason or thought. I give my life for my child, no hesitation. It's not bravery, it's something biological, perhaps. And that is part of what makes a child's death so awful for the parents. They would have given their own lives for that child, but they weren't allowed to negotiate or to bargain. He was simply taken from them. So, sure, the film was about grief. Or maybe you think the movie is about forgiveness. That's correct also. That's part of the love story. Will and Agnes forgiving each other in the wake of the disaster of their son's death. And hallelujah, finally we have a film about a marriage that is preserved instead of ending in divorce, where lost love between husband and wife is found again. It's also accurate to say that the film could have easily been called Agnes, because this is really about her more than it is about her son or about Shakespeare. But what I most want to talk about today is the very last few minutes of the film and Agnes's vision. Not like a prophetic vision, although you could perhaps compare it to real prophetic vision. I want to talk about what she sees in the last seconds of the film and what we see, as well as about what she does, what she accomplishes, all the while barely saying a word. She does this incredible work internally, and her vision changes. And Jessie Buckley, God bless her, with just her face, a few words, and some gestures, brings all this internal labor to life on the screen. Now, I didn't go to publish what I initially wrote about the film right away. I needed to edit and revise, and I also wanted to give myself some distance from the subject. It's an emotionally powerful film, no matter whether you agree with me or not that it is the film of the century. And I didn't want to come off as some film fanboy gushing online for clicks. And I wanted to try to hone my message down to a focus on the final scene. But let me get a few observations out of the way. There is, of course, a lot more to the film that we could spend hours going on about. What about those two trees in the opening shot? Did they represent the twins, or did they represent Will and Agnes, or Agnes and Hamnet? Were they the two trees at the center of the Garden of Eden? Did they have anything to do with the doubling in the film, such like the scene in which Will departs for London the first time and Agnes is sitting at the table in their house, in exactly the same way as when he departs for London after the death of Hamnet, but their goodbyes are completely different in those two scenes? Or what about the conflict between Agnes's druid-like or witchy nature religion and the surrounding Christian culture? The adorable relationship between Agnes and her brother, Will Shakespeare's plight as a delicate man of words in a country village surrounded by laboring farmers and tradesmen, the way that the director uses very simple cinematography for many shots, refusing to do a close up, the way that lines from Shakespeare's plays creep into the dialogue here and there. Nevertheless, I will end up referring back to some of these things, but it's not going to be a complete plot summary today. I remember thinking actually sometime before I watched Hamnet, thinking about the idea of the greatest film of the century so far. I had just recently rewatched There Will Be Blood, the Paul Thomas Anderson film with Daniel Day Lewis from 2007, I think. And somewhere I had read someone's opinion about that movie being a contender for the film of the century. And that film, There Will Be Blood, won the contest in my mind. That is, I thought at the time before seeing Hamnet that There Will Be Blood might be the greatest film of the century so far, just based on certain technical features, on the daring accomplishment of having no dialogue for the first 15 or 20 minutes, Daniel Day Lewis's performance, cinematography, whatever. But after I saw Hamnet, particularly the final scene, and I let a few days go by and I wrote a lot about it, I was able to go to friends and say, without hesitation, this is the greatest film of the 21st century to date. This is it. This is the one, the finest film of the century. Hell, I need to give it more thought, but it might be the greatest film ever. But remember, I'm trying to hold back all the gushing. And it's because of the last scene. Now, prior to that scene, Hamnet is a good film. It's a high quality reimagining of Shakespeare's youth, a fleshing out of his wife's viewpoint, a portrayal of rural life in Elizabethan England, and a powerful film about love, death, and grief. It's also a film that had so many opportunities to disappoint me. Really, I immediately feared that it was going to be another hackneyed plot about a quote unquote powerful independent woman who stands up to the patriarchy, or that it'll be some flick about how the pagan druid woman overcomes the lunk-headed Christians around here, or maybe Will Shakespeare was going to be portrayed as a neglectful, abusive husband, yada yada yada. The movie, though, doesn't have a political or social message because in the territory controlled by grief, there are no political parties, there are no religions. There is only loss and mortality and the black door of death against which we cannot protest and with which we cannot negotiate. And the elements of those other themes that remain in the film, the marital struggles, the conflict between Agnes and society, between Agnes and her mother in law, etc., they are handled so finely that they become challenges that nourish the characters rather than the hackneyed plot points of another social messaging nightmare. This was a movie then with a mission to tell the emotional journey of Agnes and Will. And Agnes's emotional journey resonates with all of us. I just learned this actually, that the movie could impact anyone in any station of life. Initially, I thought that maybe Hamnet is more relevant, more impactful for those of us who have actually lost in life, either experienced the death of someone close, or maybe even just lost a pet, or at least suffered heartbreak. You have to have hurt at least a little, I thought, to really get this film. Not a film for the young, I told myself. But in the interest of showing my youngest son something fine on film and preparing myself to write as objectively as possible for this episode, I sat down to watch the film again with this 18-year-old son of mine a few days after I watched it with my wife. But I wondered as we watched, have I made a mistake? Is this film beyond my son, a movie dealing with what is still an undiscovered country for him? So my son sat on the couch in front of me, and so I could not see his face as we watched. I noticed, though, as we got into the last scene and I was trying to control my own emotions, I noticed that he pulled out the cloth that he uses to clean his glasses and he started to wipe them down. Oh, I thought, I was right. He's bored. He's not into this. Oh well. And then, when the film came to an end, he immediately sat up, and I realized why his glasses had been fogging up. Eyes red, he looked back at me and said, "That was the greatest film I have ever seen." So I guess the film is so well done that it can draw anyone into its emotional web. What Hamnet also does so well, refreshingly, is it truly develops a character. In particular, it develops the character of Agnes. Though Will's struggle is definitely also important and integral to the film, in the end, as we shall see, this is really a movie about Agnes. Maybe the thing that really upsets me with so many other films, even films that think that they are profound, is how little development of character actually happens. All too often, the character's development is just a change of heart or opinion. The coward finds his heroism, the frightened woman discovers her strength, the rough man displays gentleness, the rigid conservative opens his mind, and so on. You don't really get to see characters grow how we really grow, how small new facets appear in our character over time, resulting from challenges, from suffering, how we deal with our own flaws, even how we fail to overcome them. Some of that development is hidden to some extent, though implied, in this film. Will Shakespeare is so nervous at the beginning, and who would not be? Having been a similar young man myself, seeking a life in books and words, I know some of the feeling. But it must have been far worse for Shakespeare in a life surrounded by people who know only farming or trades, as we are reminded by his father and mother. All this learning, his mother says, it is a putting on of airs. And so he stamps frenetically around Agnes once he realizes the power of the love that is inside him. He circles her. You and I must be handfasted, he states, referring to the ancient practice of marriage beginning with the declaration of love between the lovers. He is a man with the most tenuous possible future, proposing that a woman share that future with him. But he grows into the playwright, becomes the accomplished man who can afford to buy his family a new home, oversee the construction of a theater, the creation and production of a play that involves the coordination of writing, acting, finance, construction. But all this circles around, like Will circling his wife, all this circles around the primary touchstone event of Will and Agnes's life, the death of their son, Hamnet. But again, I'm not going to summarize the movie, so I'm going to pass over most of the rest of the film, even the poignant story arc of the twins and how Hamnet came to die. If you've watched the film, you don't need me to replay it for you. No, I think we can get to the point now, or try anyway. We can get to why I woke up at 1 a.m. one night last week and lay in bed in the darkness, thinking about how this film had impacted me. Let's talk about that final scene. At the start of the final scene, when Agnes comes to the Globe Theater, of course, a nerd like me is thrilled. In a whisper, I was mansplaining to my wife about the construction of the theater and the seating arrangements for the nobility and the commoners, etc. And then the play starts, and Agnes is completely unsophisticated in her response to it all. They have taken her son's name in vain. Her entire appearance, her presentation as the scene begins, is brutish. Now, understand that when I use a word like sophisticated, I don't mean snooty or someone who drinks wine and uses words like palate and bouquet. No, by sophisticated, I simply mean the ability to see nuances, to see the big picture, to think about things with more than just our gut responses. Not that there's anything wrong with gut responses or anything wrong with Agnes's lack of sophistication in the right setting. And when a man or a woman is carrying something heavy or doing hard work in the sun, we all regress to a certain brutishness. We are thinking about our knees, our backs, about our balance. We're not thinking about poetry or love. And pain does the same thing. When we are in pain, we revert to a certain base animal nature. We don't want poetry. We don't see beauty. We are preoccupied, carrying the pain. Just so Agnes is brutish as she enters the Globe Theater because she's carrying so much. What is all this? I don't understand. That's my son's name. How dare they say my son's name? That comprises most of her dialogue throughout the next 20 minutes of the scene. Agnes has so much work to do in such a short period of time because what is she going to do with all this baggage, with all these burdens, with her son's death, her husband's inadequate response to the loss of their son, and to her own grieving, her worsening isolation in life, living now in the quote unquote biggest house in Stratford, while trying to identify still with her herbal remedies which could not save the life of her son, her communion with the forest. And don't forget, Agnes is still grieving her own mother, whose life and death we see only in glimpses, but which Agnes still clearly treasures. And furthermore, Agnes is carrying the confusion. She's confused by the mystery of her husband, Will Shakespeare, who has been living now for something like a decade in London and has built this theater and become wealthy, while she endured in the countryside with their children and with in laws, practically exiled from her own family, surrounded by people who look on her with suspicion. And perhaps most of all, Agnes hurts because really she chose all this. She has come here to confront him, to confront Will in his work which has caused so much division in their marriage and family, this thing that has absorbed him all his life, and even more so once their son died. But again, this was Agnes's idea. It wasn't like Will came to her begging to leave. She sent him away because she could see that he was dying in that village, because she saw that she was going to lose him one way or the other, and she wanted him to flourish because she loved him so much. And so she comes to confront him, somewhat indirectly perhaps, in his workplace. She confronts his work, this thing, this creative bugbear that has both inspired their life together and troubled their marriage and their family. This work of his, she confronts it finally. She has supported this work. She is the reason it exists because Will Shakespeare, as complex as he is in the story, is essentially a good man, and he was only able to go to London because Agnes sent him. He didn't want to abandon his family. She didn't just let him go. It's not like he asked and she agreed. No, she saw something in him. But she was seeing him, seeing Will Shakespeare right from the beginning. This man who had no prospects, who was tutoring boys in Latin in a rural village, who isn't even a man in the eyes of their contemporaries. She saw that there was something in him that was dying amid the farms and the dirt roads, something that needed the stimulation of London if it was going to thrive. If her husband was going to flourish, he had to leave them. "I've lost my way," he tells her one night when he struggles with his writing that has done nothing for his family so far. "I just need to work," he says. That is what Agnes wants for her husband. That is what she chooses while she awaits the birth of their second child, virtually alone in their village. She wants him to work, to flourish, and so she braves the decision, sends him away to flourish or fail while she continues an isolated existence in their home village, giving birth again, raising their family. That word, flourish, I keep using it. Let me explain a little. A long time ago, the Greek philosopher Aristotle wrote a book called The Ethics, and it is really actually a guidebook for being happy, for achieving happiness. But this word happiness is probably a bad translation today. Now, once upon a time, such as when it was used in the American Declaration of Independence, happiness was a translation of a Greek word used in Aristotle's Ethics. The Greek word was eudaimonia. But the English word happiness, as used today, does not really have the meaning that it had when it was used to translate Aristotle's Ethics. Now, happiness means ice cream, good sex, a day off from work. That's happiness, right? And we have a right to that, right? Like the Declaration says. But now that we have brought the word happiness down into the gutter of base pleasures, the Greek word eudaimonia is probably better translated today as human flourishing. Aristotle's guidebook, The Ethics, then, was really about how to flourish as a human being, not simply how to be amused. St. Irenaeus from the 2nd century AD has an even better way of describing this phenomenon. The glory of God, he says, is a human being fully alive. Agnes wants her husband to be fully alive, to flourish. Now, why this digression about flourishing? Because obviously it's on Agnes's mind that Will has flourished. He has come fully to life and at her expense. She chose this. She sent him away while she languished in rural England. That's not the only thing that hurts, of course. That is not the only thing weighing her down, reducing her to curt reprisals of the play and everyone around her as the players act out Hamlet on stage, because Will has not even, in her eyes, properly grieved. Their young son died. He died as a child can only do, tragically. Will is not even present for the death, arriving too late, having been off in London, working certainly, but also surely enjoying the life of a pseudo bachelor, while his children suffered illness and his wife abided at their side. And in the aftermath of Hamnet's death, Will is not even, quote unquote, there for her, as the saying goes. All he can seem to say in the face of Agnes's devastating grief is, "There was nothing you could do." Saying this is how he tries to help Agnes grieve. And then he goes, he leaves. The world does not stand still, he says, by way of excuse. He has work to do, people to meet. So she strikes him. I liked that the movie dared to get physical here with the married couple wrestling. Their son's death has destroyed the very fabric of their relationship, and we should not be surprised by moments of madness in the aftermath. So Agnes, when she comes down to London finally to see her husband's play, she's carrying a heavy weight. She only looks like she walks into the theater unburdened. She comes into the theater, and the burden she carries atop her, it's not just grief, it's anger, it is sorrow, it is resentment. Because Will has met her physical needs. Yes, he has given her children, he has provided for her, but in her eyes, he has utterly failed to be her companion, to share the emotional burdens of life and death. So she begins to watch the play Hamlet, which, as we learn at the beginning of the film, is just an alternate version of the name of their late son, Hamnet. Her first reaction to the play is, as I said, unsophisticated, brutish. What's this all about? How dare they use my son's name? And just so, a man or a woman carrying either a heavy physical or emotional burden can often do little more than react, as Agnes does here. She does not see the stagecraft, the graphic art, the beautiful nobles in the upper seats, the graceful movements of the actors. She just sees a mockery of her son. Hercules, in Roman and Greek myth, also carried an emotional burden. In a fit of madness, he killed his wife and his children, and so his atonement, his working through the grief, in a sense, was the completion of 12 heavy labors. And here, Agnes's task, like Hercules' labors, is to drop that load, which sounds easy, but that load she's carrying atop her is a lot of stuff. That burden she carries contains her son, and it contains a lot of things that have become her personality and things that have become her coping mechanisms. Even if those mechanisms may be misguided or self destructive, it is hard for us to let go of our only tools, our only defenses. It is asking a lot. But let me alter the metaphor here a little and say that this burden also blinds us, like a cloak thrown over our eyes or a set of blinkers on a horse. Such burdens keep us from seeing things, both things that might help us and things that we simply don't want to see. And what might it be that she doesn't want to see? Her husband, Will Shakespeare. I don't mean simply see him on stage. She does that right away when he makes his entrance in the first act as the ghost of old Hamlet. That's him, she says, but with little love, perhaps, in her voice. She sees the shape of her husband. She has never lost sight of that. But she doesn't want, at this point in their fractured relationship, to see anything but his shape. She doesn't want to see him. She doesn't want to see the man whose qualities moved her to make so many sacrifices, said sacrifices which ultimately resulted in him not being present for their son's death. He was not present, but she surely blames herself for that on some level. Agnes now, though, slowly begins to let down the burden, slowly opens the eyes of her soul to see what is going on in front of her. Now, I read some comments on YouTube about this scene. All were, of course, different shades of adulation and praise. Most addressed the one final moment of the scene, which concerns me now. Up to these last moments, she has been seeing more and more of what is going on, comprehending the play, not simply its script and its settings, but also seeing how this play is her husband's way of grieving, his way of expressing grief. She sees that while they have been apart both physically and emotionally, he too has been processing the loss of their son. And many comments that I read online pointed this out, that in the final scene, she understood that her husband simply had a different way of grieving, one perhaps that he simply couldn't share with her. And as I said before, there is validity to each of these various ideas about what happens in the final scene. And she forgave him. I suspect this idea of forgiveness for Will hits hard, in particular for many of us, because we know what it is like to endure unforgiven in a relationship. And so I agree with many commenters that forgiveness is part of the meaning expressed in her final study of her husband as he stands there just off stage. She forgives him for everything. And some others pointed out in the comments that she once again looked on Will with admiration. Admiration, which is a necessary ingredient in the emotional cocktail of love. Yes, she admires him for everything that he has done now, for this incredible work of art that he has created. But while those things are certainly part of what Agnes is expressing here, I wonder if you can go back to the scene yourself now and see the exact moment as she gazes on Will Shakespeare, standing off stage in costume, the exact moment when she leaves behind those acknowledgments and sees the man that is Will Shakespeare. At the very end of her gazing on him, in my opinion, she leaves behind all those other things and she truly sees him, maybe as she has not seen him since they were young and in love. Now, earlier in the film, she, in their youth, she touches Will, touches his hand, and she sees things with her witch's inner eye. And then again, they touch more intimately, making love for the first time. And they enjoy that period that most new lovers have when they frolic and run together through life, becoming for a short time sort of a new creature, melding together, sharing moments, thoughts, seeing each other perhaps with an improved vision, looking past the character flaws and even past the positive characteristics and really just seeing this other being with whom you are sharing a precious moment and space in the world. What did you see? He asked her about that time she gripped his hand in hers and meditated on it. I saw landscapes, she says, spaces, caves, cliff tops, tunnels, and oceans, this deep, dark, black void, undiscovered countries. The phrase undiscovered countries is another hidden reference to the play Hamlet, suggesting again how Shakespeare was incorporating moments of his family life into his work. But she was able, in those moments of getting to know him, to love him, to see these things that might almost sound alien to someone who was hoping for a more standard romance here. She doesn't answer that she sees how brave he is, how intelligent he is, or how handsome, or something about compassion, or some other character trait that might draw a woman to a man in romance. No, she sees a deep, dark, black void. And yes, on one level, this is just like his tale about Orpheus and Eurydice. This prefigures Hamnet's death, but this is also speaking to something about all of us. Because Agnes sees in that first encounter with him that Will is not simply a prospective lover, he's not simply another village man trying to use her. And in this late moment of the play, as she looks at him, and at the work that he has wrought. She also sees that he's not simply her husband or her lover, or a poet or a playwright, a grieving father or an abused son. She sees Will in that moment as starkly as she saw him at the beginning, and as starkly as she sees her son depart from the stage of life and enter the darkness where, as the movie tells us more than once, quoting the play Hamlet, the rest is silence. Beneath all of our traits, beneath all of our flaws and our virtues, there is a being, a silent ground of being that is both uniquely us and yet also made of the same substance as everyone else. I mean, maybe you've heard of the idea that we are all waves on the ocean, but eventually every wave collapses and we all go back into the one sea. There's an excellent moment in a movie about the Apostle Paul in which he compares the life of men to handfuls of ocean water. These handfuls of water are distinct only temporarily and made from the same substance, and all return eventually to the ocean. And I think that this is what Agnes really sees. She doesn't just see her husband and admire him again, or forgive him, or grieve with him. I think this is part of what's going on. Like I said before, she is forgiving him, she is admiring him. She is seeing what this man of hers, in whom she believes so strongly, what he has done with her confidence in him. Sure. But there's more. She's really seeing him, the silent, bare being of him. "Look at me," she says, watching him grieve for their son in public in the character of old Hamlet. And this is not "look at me, look at how beautiful I am, pay attention to me, look at my pretty dress, or look at how I love you, look at me and feel something for me." She's not really asking him to do her a favor. She's saying, "Look at me and see me how I see you now, how I see you again. See the undiscovered country." People talk about quote unquote being seen as part of their emotional existential needs in life, to not simply be acknowledged, but to be seen with a comprehensive gaze, to be understood. Agnes sees that, like her, Will too is someone who was just dropped into this reality without having asked to be here, without having asked to be a frail man of words in a rough world that only respects force, without having asked for the violence of his passions, without having asked for the power of his weakness, without having asked to suffer abuse, poverty, and loss, and wondering all the time as if it is worth it to suffer the slings and arrows, all the time contemplating that consummation devoutly to be wished for. Just as she did not ask to be the weird child in a hostile village, to be moved by passion, to have children with a man of uncertain prospects, to suffer childbirth and child loss, to have her own aspirations drowned in housework and child rearing. She sees Will. She sees that he is like her, that really he is her, another handful of water from the same ocean. And when we see each other this way, when we see each other as flawed, desperate, lonely souls born into the universe without ever having been asked, then we really see ourselves. And then we really are one. And we see that we should love each other, have compassion on each other. Each of us, at our core, is the same lonely, frightened being. That they may all be one, the Gospel according to St. John tells us. Maybe this is what is meant when we are told to love one another. Maybe our English word love is not an adequate translation of the New Testament Greek. Maybe it means really seeing one another and identifying with the other, as Agnes did in that moment as she gazed for so long at her husband, and the burdens fell from her shoulders, and she became free to love him again. She saw him standing there almost like a new being, or maybe she saw again the things that she saw when she first took his hand. Maybe she saw a landscape, spaces, caves, cliff tops, tunnels, and oceans, this deep, dark, black void, an undiscovered country. Undiscovered countries, all of us. Such a vision, though, really is its own burden. If you have never seen anyone this way, or if you have experienced such vision only briefly, do not be too hard on yourself. Life can't be an endless epiphany. Peter, James, and John go up on the mountain with Jesus. And while they're up there, they see him in all his glory, transfigured. But when they come down the mountain, he's just Jesus again. And just so we can't see each other in this life for more than a few moments, can't see each other's core being for very long. It's a blinding vision. Eventually Will and Agnes will go home together and there will be chores to do, and one of them will snore, and maybe he'll leave a mess at the dinner table and annoy her. But you can be sure that now their relationship will have this touchstone, this point of reference, which will ground them, perhaps forever. A tie that binds and binds permanently. This recognition, this identity, this vision. But as satisfying as my thesis might be to me, this imaginary and devoutly to be wished for opportunity to be seen, to be completely seen in that way, to experience a love that goes beyond desire, admiration, and passion, nevertheless, I would be remiss if I did not end the episode with a look at the very last seconds of the film, when the subject reverts back to where it all began, with the real protagonist of the story, Agnes. This movie has packed so much into this last scene, and it just gets denser with every passing second. A year is nothing, Agnes says. It's every second, every minute. Indeed, after all that she has worked through in these last few moments, now, literally in the last seconds of the play, she does more. She has recovered her husband by now, in a way both substantial and emotional. She has healed the wound between them, because she is a healer, remember, and she has perhaps redeemed her own self after not being able to heal her son. She has accomplished a different kind of healing here. And she has also let go of her son, finally. She has seen him walk through the door into the void, and she has been freed of the burden of grief. Beyond this point, a person may still grieve, but it's a different kind of grief, a grief that is no longer an enemy tearing you apart, but now a part of yourself as much as your lost loved one once was. And so then, with the very last few seconds of the film, you see her gaze turn inward. No longer is Agnes watching anyone else. She sees herself again, in a way. And you see her laugh in a way that she has probably not laughed since the death of Hamnet. She has her joy back. And then, in the very last second of the film, Agnes is just Agnes, neither laughing nor crying. Her eyes are open, but her thoughts are turned inward in some kind of ineffable revelation that we each will probably share with her someday when we confront our own being and that black door through which we will all pass into that undiscovered country where all that we love will either precede or follow us, and where we will all be one again. And the rest is silence. My name is Rob Paxton, and I thank you for listening to the Western Traditions Podcast.